I must admit that no track really makes me want to stick a car in a wall and end my race early, quite like France. At least that was my idea at one time, and just move on to Austria. But I will say this track actually became to be a lot more fun as I got to know it. So just to give you a quick overview, this section we're in right now, this is a spot where you need to be patient. And notice that I'm not going to use any brake right here. I'm just going to lift out the gas and get back on it. All right, now this is a track that when I turned off the race line and kind of made myself figure this place out on my own, I really came to like this track. It's really fun to work on setup. It's really fun to work on rhythm. Um, it's a really cool track. While we're on the straightaway, we'll say I wasn't very well liked as a child, and I'm trying to make up for it now. So please leave me a like for the video. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. As we go into the next section, we're going to come into another spot where it's just one continuous braking zone. Coming up right here, very late and very light braking. Remember, notice I'm not on the gas until I'm ready to accelerate off the corner. The line assist won't do that. Now, here's where I kind of use a school line. I kind of drove in really deep and kind of squared off the corner. That is, if you went into the HPDE world, a school line versus a race line. Here I am doing it again. A little bit off the beaten path, so to speak, but it's the way I found it really works for me. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this. Let's get to the turn by turn, and let's learn how to conquer France.
All right, so let's do the turn by turn for France. The first turn is one of the trickiest on the track just because it's blind. And until you're on this turn, you really can't see it. So this is coming on the front stretch. Notice that I'm abusing track limits, a common thing if you watch a lot of my walks. 2 tires on the track. I use this cut across road as my brake reference, and pretty much you use the beginning of the curb ahead up here, about level with that car. That's the curb you want to use to know when you're going to start your turn. As far as how early or how late depends on your fuel load, your tires, how fresh are those tires. Once we're ahead, I brake on this. And by the way, there are some brake reference boards. I never use them. I always use the reference, the cut across road, and I use this curb. You may also notice at this point, depending on the lighting at the time of day, weather, you may notice a line at several points on this track that you can follow. And notice the apex to turn 1 is still blind. And you're going to just have to work on rhythm and timing off of those 2 reference points until you can consistently get as close to this point as you can. Notice I still have 2 tires on the verge line. As long as I've got tires, like 4 tires on the curb, they seem to let me get away with this. This was run, by the way, on strict track limits. And you can see a line going up the track as well, the rubbered in line. You basically want to make sure that you don't go all the way back to the right. You want to stay kind of in the middle of the track. And you just have to work on your timing and rhythm again to determine when can you cut right. And 2 tires is on this curb is fine. 4 is going to be flirting with messing with the balance of your car. And just mainly track limits probably more than messing up and spinning you out. The exit curb is also very, very friendly. Again, flirt with the track limits. See how close can you get to abusing it. This is about as far out as you can go. And then we're going to head into the next section. Now, I just passed the 100 board. I brake it around, I would say, 75, which seems to be a common marker for me at a lot of these things. And we're going to use a very similar setup that we brake at a point, and then the turn-in point is very, very similar. The B is kind of covering up the turn-in point, and here we are. This is what my writing was covering up on the last slide. Once the car starts to go over that red and white curb, you're going to start your turn-in. Again, you can see the path worn into the track going into this next right-hander. You may also use the 50 board. I don't. I barely noticed they're there. I noticed the 100 because I know I brake about halfway between 100 and 50, but once I've started my braking, I've moved on to using this as my turn-in marker, and I'm looking for a path over that next right-hand curb. This is also a key point to mention that from here, and I'll move down to the track map here. From this spot, where we're at now, until about the DRS detection spot, as we start to set up that run down the back straight, the whole thing here is patience. You will likely not make it back to wide open throttle. And if you go through here and you feel like you really nailed the line, you felt like you did a really good job, you did pretty well, but you felt like you could have gone just a little bit faster, then you probably did it right. Pushing here tends to end up hurting you. So You'll want to be on this curb at least 2 tires. I think car placement on this curb is very, very critical. And you want to kind of connect the dot from the end of this curb to that next curb on the left that's just coming into view. And once we get to this curb, notice we're still barely back on the throttle, and we want to kind of wrap the car around this curb. Don't let the car track out. Just hold it as tight to that curb as you can. And then I use rhythm and timing again. Just when does it feel right to turn? There's not really a great reference. There's just wide open asphalts. And really the only thing to use, if you're not using the suggested line that I'm aware of at least, if you want to drop a marker that you use in the comments, tell me. You can follow this rubbered in line around the next corner. The next curb, this will kind of jack your car up if you're not careful with it. I like to put 2 tires on it or just get really close to it. But you really can use a lot of exit curbing. And the exit curbing to me is very inconsistent about when they call track limits. I try to keep at least 2 tires on, and sometimes you drift over and it lets you get away with it. Sometimes it nails you, so just be careful with it. Here's a spot I do use a reference point. Notice that, and this is the spot where I really, really would encourage you to drive without that reference assist line on. Because when you come off that last corner, it tells you to go green, which is wide open throttle, and then the line will suddenly turn red on you. And when you jam on the brakes, you're going to way overslow the car. You do not need to use your brakes in this corner in the 2020 cars. Maybe in the classics, but not in the 2020 cars. Notice I'm coming out of the gas. All you need to do to set up turn 6 is lift off the gas a little bit. And what you want to do is achieve that you turn off of this curb, head to that curb, and do it without braking. If you're braking, you're messing up your rhythm and you're going to start getting impatient. I'm telling you the best way to do it is just to lift. The car is going to want to come off the corner. The AI go way wide and then cut right back in sharp to this red and white curb and then turn sharp left down the straightaway. I don't think that's necessarily that important. I think trying to do that is going to get you crossed up and unbalanced. Maybe I'm just not good enough to get there yet. Admittedly, I don't like France. I think letting the car go out to the left is fine. But ultimately where we want to get is more or less track right and be turning off of track right by the time we get to this red and white curb. That's our goal here. So be careful with those 2 curbs, by the way, as you come onto the straightaway. The inside and the outside, they'll both jack you up. They'll also call track limits on you on either one of them. As you come down this really long straightaway, use that bridge to make sure you don't get mesmerized. It's a long straight. It'll really, really get you lost, and you'll suddenly forget all your markers. There are some brake markers down both sides of the track as well. I don't use them. I do use this chicane that's not used as my brake marker. I brake when I'm alongside that, which is about the 90 or so. I don't necessarily have a good turn-in reference to give you either, other than just you want to make sure you use a lot of this curb. So remember, we're going to abuse this curb, and we want to hold the left half of the track more or less as we go down the straightaway. Our turn-in reference is going to be coming off yet another unused chicane, and we're going to turn right about that curb. Here we are again. As I just mentioned, we're on the left half of the track, and notice I'm turning along the blue edge, and I'm going to be aiming to get to this curb, abuse this curb too, put 2 tires on it. 4 tires you might get away with. I usually just go for 2. And where you really want to be is here. Just make sure you draw a nice straight line. You're wide open throttle. Wrap it back onto the straightaway. If you do decide you need to use that curb, that's fine, but that wheel needs to be perfectly straight. And if you're using overtake, you might get away with rich fuel mode. But if you hit the overtake button too early as you're going over this and put that extra power in the car, it's just that little extra jump it needs to just jack the car up and spin you out into this guardrail or over into this wall over here. So a little, not quite as long of a straight, actually not nearly as long of a straight. And we come to these 3 boards that indicate that a sharper turn is coming than it is, but it's not. This next turn is wide open throttle. You'll turn at or just past the 50. at a right-hand curb over there. Aim to get to it, but it will spin you out if you're not careful with it. And this is around that next right-hand bend. This is going into a very sharp yet very fast turn, which is kind of odd thing to say. But look at on the track map underneath this word how long it goes around. So it's not really sharp, but it wraps around so long. This corner on the assistant line will really mess you up because it turns red and then you brake harder than you need to, and then you end up on the gas carrying the car around the corner, and you don't need to do that. Your goal in this corner is to use a very light brake about going through about half the corner, a trail brake if you're a technical kind of track nerd. And then it's kind of a double apex as well. So you're going to go inside, let the car drift out, and then once you can see the next apex curb on the right side, you're going to pull the car right back in. So let me show you. This is where, notice I have a little bit of gas still in the car, and I'm just lightly braking. And I might brake a few more bars than that just for a moment, but this is more or less all the brake I'm going to give it. And I'm on a pedal set, and I just barely have my foot on the brake going around here. I pull it in towards this curb, but I may or may not make it to the curb. And I'm trailing out my brakes. Notice, look at this. I've let a little bit of brakes go out, and I'm going so fast at this point, the car has no choice but to carry out to the outer edge of the track. And if you don't make it all the way out there, that's okay. I've even carried over that blue line. They don't seem to call track limits on it, and been okay. This is about perfect track placement for AI because notice that there is still the rubbered in marks. And by the way, if I go back for a moment, that little turn-in board is still there, the corner board. It's not a turn-in board, rather. It's a corner board. So keep your eye on the corner board because beyond the corner board, there's the curb. And once you start to see that curb, you should have enough speed scrubbed off just naturally by coasting a little bit or maybe by still lightly braking. Sometimes I go through here, I'm still lightly braking, actually. The car will suddenly have the ability, if you have a decent feel for the game, to suddenly cut and get to that curb. And when you have that feeling, go for it. 2 over this curb is perfect. And then you can go ahead and you can use your exit and you're going to move to the track right. And these next 2 curbs or next 2 braking zones are going to have a very similar setup to them. So once the curb starts on the left-hand side, you're going to brake hard and let the car go deep into the corner. If you watch here, I'm using ABS, and I will be wide open throttle and have a little bit of wheel turned in the car, and yet I'm going so fast it just will not quite brake and turn. Or it'll brake well, but it just won't quite turn. Now, if there is a car inside of you, you will need to make sure that, or if there's a car behind you, like battling you for position, you will want to make sure you kind of cover the inside of the track a little bit better than I am now. This is where I use a school line. If you ever go into the world of high-performance driving schools, school lines versus race lines, I use a school line in 12, definitely. And so the car will get slowed down to the point you ought to be able to tell it'll suddenly cut in. 2 tires kissing this curb is okay. If you're using this curb, you're going to be in trouble, I think. There's like a little right-hander going around that next bend. You want to keep it to the right around this little bend here where you can see 2 cars are behind me. Keep the car track right. Use a very similar feel to the last brake zone going in turn 14. There's a curb. You can't quite see it due to the sun, but we're right in our brake zone now. Once you get level with it, hard braking. The car, I kind of almost overshoot the corner a little bit. If there's a car behind me battling me for position, I have to move over a little bit to make sure they can't take it. If I'm on this pit lane verge line, I know I'm doing well. And the car is going to eventually slow enough that it'll suddenly cut, and I'll get 2 tires on this line. That's fine. And I want to do something kind of similar we did in the last little patient zone back in Sector 1, is kind of hug that curb around to the left. And I'm going to use a timing and rhythm thing again to just know I'm just going to ever so briefly get wide open throttle or maybe just darn close to wide open throttle. I'm going to jam on the brakes, and now I'm going to make a late turn into the last turn on the track. I might use 2 tires on this curb. 4 on the curb seems to just kind of jack up the balance on the car, and it just doesn't feel good to me. And it just seems to kind of mess up your momentum down the straightaway. But anyway, that's the way you want to get around this track. Keep it up.